Your property is now under HOA control for unpaid assessments totaling $68,000. And as of this moment, your ranch is officially seized for back taxes. You have 24 hours to vacate before we change the locks and dispose of your belongings like any other tax deadbeat. That's what Kenneth Sutherland shrieked at me while waving a fraudulent tax lien document. His pink dress shirt stretched tight across his bloated gut, black dress pants riding up as he gestured wildly with his clipboard toward my 680-acre cattle ranch that had been in my family since 1887. The smell of his expensive cologne mixed with morning hay and the metallic taste of pure rage as this suburban dictator stood there absolutely convinced he'd just stolen prime Texas ranch land through some bureaucratic loophole involving fake back taxes. I'm Sheriff Cole Rodriguez, and for 28 years I've served Brazos County in law enforcement, working my way up from patrol deputy to detective to finally earning the sheriff's badge in 2019. But standing there in my red and black checkered flannel shirt, watching this entitled coward wave fraudulent tax documents at the county sheriff, whose department investigates exactly these types of criminal schemes, I felt the cold satisfaction of knowing exactly how this would end. What Kenneth didn't know was that in exactly 14 months, he'd be standing in federal court facing racketeering charges for systematic property fraud, while his entire HOA board faced criminal prosecution for conspiracy to commit theft through fabricated tax liens. And I'd be the one wearing my dress uniform, presenting evidence that would send Kenneth to federal prison for 23 years while seizing every asset he'd acquired through his criminal real estate empire. What would you do if some HOA tried to steal your family ranch using fake tax liens? Where are you watching from? Drop a flag emoji and tell me your state, because this story will show you exactly how to destroy property fraud schemes using 28 years of law enforcement experience and the authority to investigate every fraudulent document Kenneth had ever filed. My name is Cole Rodriguez, and 5 years ago I thought inheriting my great-grandfather's ranch would provide the perfect place to raise cattle while serving as county sheriff, honoring both my family's agricultural legacy and my commitment to protecting Brazos County from the kind of criminals who prey on hardworking families. After spending nearly 3 decades in law enforcement, including specialized training in financial crimes and property fraud investigation, I was looking forward to quiet evenings checking cattle while maintaining the rural values that made Texas communities strong and resilient. The Rodriguez Ranch had been established in 1887 when my great-grandfather Miguel Rodriguez claimed 680 acres under the Texas Homestead Act, building the original ranch house with timber cut from our own land, and establishing the cattle operation that would sustain 4 generations of Rodriguez families. The property included prime grazing land, 3 natural springs, and the kind of agricultural infrastructure that represented the foundation of Texas' rural economy and family heritage. My grandfather, Sergeant Robert Rodriguez, had expanded the ranch during the 1920s after his service in World War I, adding modern cattle facilities and irrigation systems that transformed the operation into one of Brazos County's most productive family ranches. The ranch had weathered the Great Depression, drought cycles, and economic challenges while maintaining the agricultural productivity that fed growing Texas communities and preserved the rural character that defined our region's identity. My father, Deputy James Rodriguez, had modernized the entire operation during the 1960s while serving in law enforcement, installing updated facilities and sustainable grazing systems that met federal agricultural standards while maintaining the family traditions that connected 4 generations of Texas ranchers. By the time I inherited the ranch in 2019, it represented both a successful agricultural operation and a living monument to the values of hard work, family legacy, and rural community that built Texas. The ranch itself was a masterpiece of sustainable agriculture, supporting 240 head of cattle on carefully managed pastures that had been continuously improved through 4 generations of Rodriguez stewardship. The operation included modern facilities, equipment storage, and the kind of agricultural infrastructure that represented significant investment in both family heritage and community food production. My professional background as county sheriff specializing in financial crimes had taught me to recognize and investigate the property fraud schemes that targeted rural landowners, elderly farmers, and families whose agricultural properties attracted commercial development pressure. The combination of law enforcement experience and agricultural knowledge had prepared me to protect both my family's legacy and other rural families from the criminal schemes that threatened Texas ranch land. For 4 years after inheriting the ranch, I'd operated it as both a family legacy and a demonstration of sustainable agriculture, maintaining cattle operations that supported local food production while serving as county sheriff protecting rural communities from exactly the kind of property fraud that targeted agricultural families. The ranch provided both personal satisfaction and professional credibility, showing that law enforcement officers understood and protected the agricultural communities they served. The trouble started when Willowbrook Estates development appeared on the adjacent 1,200 acres in early 2022. What had been neighboring ranch land suddenly swarmed with bulldozers, survey crews, and construction workers building luxury suburban homes for wealthy buyers seeking rural lifestyle without rural responsibilities or agricultural understanding. Kenneth Sutherland, the development company president and self-appointed HOA dictator, was a 58-year-old real estate speculator who'd made his fortune buying distressed properties and manipulating legal systems to acquire land through fraudulent schemes disguised as legitimate business transactions. At 58, Kenneth had the soft appearance of someone who'd spent decades behind a desk stealing other people's property, while never understanding the actual work required to build and maintain agricultural operations. Kenneth's initial approach seemed professional. He claimed to represent property owners concerned about agricultural activities that allegedly affected property values in luxury residential developments. He emphasized his commitment to community compatibility and suggested that my cattle operation might benefit from modernization that would eliminate odors, noise, and activities that supposedly threaten suburban property values. The relationship began souring when Kenneth discovered that my ranch wasn't subject to HOA jurisdiction and couldn't be controlled through the community association rules that governed his development. During our first meeting, he'd suggested that I might want to consider transitioning my agricultural operation to more community-compatible activities that wouldn't interfere with luxury residential property values. When I politely explained that the Rodriguez Ranch had been operating successfully for over a century and would continue as a working cattle operation under agricultural exemptions that predated suburban development, Kenneth's demeanor shifted from fake cooperation to barely concealed hostility. His pink dress shirt seemed to tighten across his gut, as his face reddened with the kind of anger that comes from someone unused to being told no. The harassment started when Kenneth began filing complaints with county officials about my ranch, claiming agricultural activities violated zoning regulations, environmental standards, and community compatibility requirements that allegedly applied to properties adjacent to residential developments. Each complaint required official investigation, forcing me to take time away from sheriff duties to defend agricultural rights that were clearly established in Texas law. Kenneth's strategy became clear when he began researching legal ways to acquire my ranch through bureaucratic pressure, regulatory harassment, and what he called community improvement initiatives, designed to eliminate agricultural operations that interfered with suburban development profits. He consulted with attorneys about property acquisition, contacted tax assessors about valuation disputes, and built relationships with county officials who might support residential development over agricultural preservation. That evening, as I stood on my ranch porch watching sunset paint the Texas sky while listening to cattle settling for the night, I realized that Kenneth had made a fundamental miscalculation about his opponent. He'd assumed I was just another rural landowner who could be intimidated through regulatory pressure and legal threats about property compatibility. What he didn't know was that I was the county sheriff who investigated property fraud, had specialized training in financial crimes, and possessed the law enforcement authority to expose and prosecute the exact type of criminal schemes Kenneth was planning to use against my family's ranch. Kenneth's final mistake was underestimating his opponent while simultaneously providing me with evidence of systematic targeting of agricultural properties for commercial acquisition through fraudulent legal processes. Kenneth's first official assault came on a Tuesday morning that started with the kind of heat that makes even the mesquite trees look tired. I was checking water troughs in the south pasture when I heard the crunch of tires on Caliche and looked up to see Kenneth's white HOA golf cart rolling toward my ranch gate. He climbed out wearing that same pink dress shirt and black dress pants, clipboard clutched to his chest like a shield, followed by two men in contractor polos who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. "Sheriff Rodriguez," Kenneth called out, his voice carrying that fake friendliness that makes honest folks reach for their wallets. "As of this morning, you're in violation of Brazos County back tax compliance protocols totaling $68,000 in delinquent assessments. The contractors unrolled vinyl signs faster than you could say fraud, posting red and white placards on my gate, notice of seizure for unpaid taxes." I took a slow sip of coffee from my thermos, the bitter taste grounding me while I watched this performance. "You practicing law without a license now, Kenneth?" I asked. Because those signs say taxes, and in Brazos County, the only folks who collect taxes work for the county tax assessor, not some HOA with delusions of grandeur. He thrust a stapled packet at me, the cheap copy paper rough under my fingers. Stone River Management has verified your arrearage per county nuisance abatement protocols, he declared, sweat already darkening his collar despite the morning hour. We're securing this property today for community protection. What followed wasn't just harassment. It was a full-scale campaign designed to overwhelm me with bureaucratic warfare. Every day brought certified letters that stuffed my mailbox like unwanted Christmas catalogs. Intent to foreclose for assessments, notice of nuisance abatement for agricultural odors, citation for erosion runoff threatening community infrastructure. In 12 days, I received 19 pieces of mail, each carrying the chemical smell of cheap toner and the heavier stench of fraud. The psychological warfare escalated when Kenneth began weaponizing county agencies against me. A compliance inspector showed up claiming to verify setback encroachments, skinny kid with a laminated badge that said field compliance and no last name. When I asked for proper ID, he stammered about management company protocols before scurrying back to his truck. By day 4, Kenneth had escalated to trespassing. Motion cameras I'd placed around the equipment shed pinged my phone at 2:19 a.m., showing two silhouettes with flashlights and bolt cutters attempting to break into my barn. They didn't get in, new deadbolts stopped them cold. But by 8:05 a.m. sharp, another letter arrived alleging abandoned equipment and potential environmental contamination from petroleum products, complete with photos of my locked shed taken during their midnight visit. The financial warfare was systematic and sophisticated. Kenneth had created a spreadsheet tracking what he called lienable charges, a blend of fabricated HOA assessments and fictional tax penalties that totaled $72,340. The 19 cents told me everything. Real criminals love precise decimals because they think accuracy looks honest. Kenneth's network expanded like mesquite after a wet spring. Old Man Pritchard called, his voice wheezy with 83 years of Texas weather. Cole, they posted notices on our west fence too, said we owe dues on the green space. We ain't in no HOA. At the feed store, I heard ranch hands whispering about the sheriff's place getting foreclosed for back taxes. Kenneth's lies spreading through the community like poison in a water well. The breaking point came when Kenneth hired AAA towing to steal my truck from my own driveway at 2:03 a.m. I woke to the sound of chains and hydraulic whining, stepped outside to find my F-150 being loaded while Kenneth supervised in his pink shirt, clipboard in hand like some suburban general directing a military operation. The tow truck driver took one look at my badge and started backing down faster than a cat from a dog fight. This is a legitimate community standards enforcement action, Kenneth declared, his voice rising as his scheme unraveled. Commercial vehicles don't get special treatment just because someone wears a badge. What Kenneth didn't realize was that Texas Transportation Code requires specific authorization for private property tows. Property owner consent, posted signage, immediate police notification. By having my truck towed without consent, Kenneth had graduated from harassment to theft under state law. But the real genius of Kenneth's operation was its scope. Through my investigation, I discovered he'd been running identical schemes against 12 agricultural properties within 3 miles of Willowbrook. The Hendersons got hit for excessive livestock noise. The Martinez family faced groundwater contamination allegations. Each family received the same fabricated tax liens, the same forged county documents, the same systematic harassment designed to force property sales at below-market prices. Kenneth had turned property theft into a business model, complete with shell companies, corrupt county officials, and a board attorney, whose notary commission had expired 8 months earlier. Every document he filed was evidence of systematic fraud. Every threatening letter was mail fraud. Every electronic filing was wire fraud. The beautiful irony was that Kenneth had been committing federal crimes against the one person in Brazos County with both the authority and expertise to investigate organized property fraud. While he was busy playing government official with his clipboard and fake authority, I was building a federal RICO case that would put him in prison until his pink dress shirts faded to gray. My phone calls to the Texas Rangers, FBI Financial Crimes Unit, and U.S. Postal Inspection Service weren't panic. They were professional courtesy. Kenneth had just declared war on a county sheriff who specialized in exactly the crimes he was committing. The only question was whether he'd realize his mistake before the federal marshals knocked on his door. The moment Kenneth filed that fraudulent tax lien claiming I owed $68,000 in back assessments, he crossed from harassment into federal criminal territory. And my 28 years of law enforcement experience, including specialized training in financial crimes, kicked into full investigative mode. I spent that weekend in my ranch office, surrounded by Texas property tax code statutes, federal RICO precedents, and case files that would make Kenneth's pink dress shirt turn white with fear. What Kenneth didn't know was that Sheriff Cole Rodriguez had literally written Brazos County's property fraud investigation protocols after prosecuting a similar scheme in 2018. I developed the systematic approach that made our department a state leader in financial crime prosecution, with a 94% conviction rate on organized fraud cases. My investigation began with Kenneth's fraudulent lien, and the document was a masterpiece of criminal stupidity. He'd claimed I owed $68,000 in HOA assessments when my ranch had never been subject to HOA jurisdiction, fabricated penalties that didn't exist under Texas law, and forged signatures from county officials who had no authority over agricultural property taxation. But the smoking gun was the document's metadata, created on Kenneth's personal computer and printed on his home printer, complete with digital fingerprints that would make a forensic accountant weep with joy. The federal implications became clear when I traced Kenneth's financing through banking subpoenas and financial intelligence databases. Kenneth had been systematically acquiring agricultural properties throughout East Texas using identical fraud schemes, creating a criminal enterprise worth over $47 million in stolen ranch land through fabricated liens and regulatory harassment. When property fraud involves systematic patterns across state lines, it triggers federal RICO jurisdiction, transforming neighborhood harassment into organized crime with mandatory minimum sentences. My analysis revealed Kenneth had been coordinating with corrupt officials in Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana, sharing tactics for targeting agricultural families through a network that specialized in rural property theft. I called Texas Ranger Captain Maria Santos first. We'd worked financial crimes together for 15 years. "Cole, this sounds like the Beaumont case from 2019, she said, referencing a similar scheme we'd prosecuted. "Same MO, same shell company structure. I'll detail a ranger to your task force." Next was FBI Special Agent Jennifer Walsh from the Houston White Collar Crime Unit. "Sheriff, your case fits a pattern we've been tracking across 6 states. These aren't random HOA disputes. It's organized property theft with federal jurisdiction written all over it." The U.S. Postal Inspection Service was particularly interested when I explained Kenneth's mail fraud scheme. Inspector David Chen had been tracking similar operations, color of law property theft using fraudulent government documents. "That's our bread and butter, Sheriff, count us in." Within 72 hours, I had a federal task force that included Texas Rangers, FBI financial crimes specialists, postal inspectors, and IRS criminal investigators. We established our command center in the Brazos County Sheriff's Office, complete with evidence boards, financial analysis software, and enough federal firepower to take down a cartel. The investigation revealed Kenneth's operation was more sophisticated than typical property fraud. He'd established multiple LLCs to hide criminal activities: Stone River Management Collections, Lone Star Advisors Consulting, and Brazos Valley Properties Acquisitions. Each company had different registered agents, but financial analysis showed they all led back to Kenneth's personal accounts. We discovered Kenneth had been paying County Tax Assessor Gerald Morrison $75,000 in consulting fees to expedite fraudulent tax assessments. Environmental activist Sandra Phillips received $45,000 for filing false EPA complaints against targeted ranchers. Even the board attorney was on Kenneth's payroll, receiving $25,000 to notarize documents with an expired commission. The money trail was beautiful in its criminal simplicity. HOA dues, right arrow Stone River Management, right arrow shell companies, right arrow Kenneth's personal accounts, right arrow bribes to corrupt officials, right arrow more property theft. The forensic accountant from the Texas Attorney General's office called it textbook money laundering with a property fraud twist. But the real breakthrough came when we executed search warrants simultaneously across 3 counties. At Kenneth's home office, we found the mother lode, pre-printed seizure notices, rubber stamps reading filed and delinquent, and a desktop folder labeled tax templates containing form documents for fabricating liens. In his computer, we discovered the settlements spreadsheet with tabs for targets, amounts paid, refused, and board disbursements. The disbursements tab showed Kenneth had paid himself $127,000 in consulting fees from fraudulent settlements, while his co-conspirators received smaller amounts for their participation. The email evidence was devastating. Kenneth to Stone River, maintain pressure on the sheriff. Adjacent assessments are viable if we create enough paperwork, someone will fold. Reply from the board attorney, avoid tax in writing. Use assessment if seizure is mentioned, say security interest. Most damning was Kenneth's correspondence with similar operations in other states. He'd been sharing victim lists, legal strategies, and corrupt official contacts through an encrypted messaging app. The network included property fraud operations in Arkansas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and New Mexico, all using Kenneth's playbook to steal rural land. Federal wiretaps revealed Kenneth's true motivations during recorded conversations with out-of-state developers. "These old ranchers don't understand modern property law," he bragged. "Create enough bureaucratic pressure, and they'll sell for 50 cents on the dollar rather than fight City Hall." The investigation took 8 months and filled 47 evidence boxes with documents, recordings, and digital evidence. We identified 63 victims across 5 states who'd lost property to Kenneth's network, with total losses exceeding $47 million. The federal grand jury returned indictments on 92 charges: racketeering, mail fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, and organized criminal activity. Kenneth faced additional charges for filing false federal reports, systematic harassment of law enforcement personnel, and conspiracy to interfere with federal investigations. But Kenneth had no idea the net was. Kenneth's desperation reached criminal insanity when he decided to escalate from fraudulent liens to actual property seizure. And the morning he made that fatal mistake, federal agents were positioned throughout Brazos County, documenting every federal crime he committed in real time. September 22nd dawned clear and hot, the kind of Texas morning where the air shimmers like water and even the cattle seek shade before 9 a.m. Kenneth arrived at my ranch gate at 7:47 a.m. with a convoy that looked like a military operation. Moving truck, private security vehicle, and what appeared to be a county constable's car. The constable was legitimate but had been deceived by Kenneth's forged paperwork. Kenneth climbed out of his white golf cart wearing his signature pink dress shirt and black dress pants. Clipboard pressed against his chest like armor. Absolutely convinced he'd found the legal authority to steal 680 acres of prime Texas ranch land. What Kenneth didn't know was that FBI agents were recording everything from 5 surveillance positions. Texas Rangers were documenting each federal crime as it occurred. And I was coordinating the entire operation from a mobile command unit parked behind the tree line, wearing federal recording equipment that captured every word of his confession to organized property theft. The court order Kenneth presented was a masterpiece of criminal forgery that would have impressed a cartel money launderer. Complete with fabricated Brazos County seals, forged judge signatures, and legal citations that referenced statutes that didn't exist, the document was designed to overwhelm rural landowners with apparent government authority. My 28 years of law enforcement experience had taught me to spot fraudulent legal documents from across a pasture, and Kenneth's forgery was obvious to anyone who'd actually seen real court orders. The case number format was wrong, the judge's signature was traced from publicly available documents, and the legal authority cited didn't exist in Texas property law. When I calmly identified myself as County Sheriff Cole Rodriguez and explained that his seizure order was fraudulent, the private security team immediately backed away from Kenneth's operation faster than horses from a rattlesnake. "Sheriff, if there's any question about legal authority, we're not participating in property seizure," the security supervisor said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd been burned by fraudulent clients before. Kenneth's response revealed the true depth of his criminal delusion. "This is legitimate county tax enforcement that supersedes individual law enforcement positions," he screamed, his voice rising with panic as his scheme collapsed in real time. "Agricultural properties don't get immunity from tax obligations just because someone wears a badge. Community standards apply to everyone equally." The federal recording equipment captured every word as Kenneth confessed to systematic property fraud, while demonstrating criminal intent to steal agricultural land from law enforcement personnel. His backup plan revealed even deeper criminal desperation when he produced what he claimed were federal agricultural seizure orders from the Department of Agriculture and EPA, requiring immediate transfer of ranch property to community development authorities. Kenneth had forged federal agency documents, complete with official letterhead and federal seals, each forged document carrying a mandatory minimum sentence of 15 years in federal prison. The psychological warfare escalated when Kenneth began making threats that revealed his systematic plan to eliminate law enforcement families from rural communities. "You think your sheriff's badge protects you from tax enforcement and community development authority," he said, pointing aggressively while sweat poured down his face despite the morning hour. "But agricultural properties don't get special treatment. Community standards and tax obligations apply to everyone, including county sheriffs who think they're above the law." The federal wire captured Kenneth's detailed knowledge of my law enforcement position, his systematic plan to acquire agricultural properties, and his belief that suburban development interests could override both agricultural protection laws and law enforcement authority through fabricated federal documents. The climax came when Kenneth ordered County Tax Assessor Gerald Morrison to begin physically securing my ranch gates with chains and padlocks, claiming immediate county seizure authority despite the security firm's refusal to participate and the presence of the county sheriff. Gerald, unaware that Texas Rangers were watching from multiple positions, began attempting to chain my gates while Kenneth supervised with his clipboard and fraudulent seizure orders. Texas Ranger Captain Maria Santos moved in when Kenneth and Gerald attempted to secure my property, transforming his fraud scheme into actual criminal theft occurring in the presence of federal law enforcement officers. Mr. Sutherland, Captain Santos said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd arrested cartel bosses and corrupt politicians. You're under arrest for systematic property fraud, racketeering, and criminal theft of agricultural property. The color drained from Kenneth's face faster than water from a broken tank as he realized his theatrical property seizure had been a federal sting operation designed to catch him committing crimes, while federal prosecutors built cases that would send him to prison for the rest of his life. Kenneth's arrest was captured on multiple federal recording devices as Rangers documented every aspect of his criminal operation. His pink dress shirt was soaked with sweat as Captain Santos read him his rights while other Rangers photographed the forged federal documents, secured the ranch gates, and arrested Gerald Morrison for participating in criminal theft of agricultural property. The federal investigation expanded dramatically when Rangers discovered Kenneth's coordination with property fraud operations in Arkansas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and New Mexico. His harassment of my ranch was part of a systematic criminal enterprise that specialized in stealing agricultural land through organized fraud schemes targeting rural law enforcement families and vulnerable ranching communities. Kenneth hadn't just been harassing one county sheriff. He'd been running a criminal organization that specialized in agricultural property theft across multiple states, with total losses exceeding $47 million in stolen ranch land. The evidence trail revealed systematic targeting of law enforcement families whose agricultural properties interfered with suburban development plans. The federal grand jury returned a superseding indictment with 112 federal charges. Racketeering, systematic property fraud, mail fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, and organized criminal enterprise targeting agricultural communities and law enforcement families. Kenneth's world was collapsing faster than his fake legal authority, and he had no idea that his next court appearance would be facing federal terrorism charges for systematic targeting of law enforcement families. As Kenneth sat in federal detention awaiting trial, I was preparing to exercise my authority as county sheriff to arrest his entire HOA board for conspiracy, while federal prosecutors built cases that would dismantle his criminal empire and protect agricultural families from property theft throughout the American West. The federal courthouse in Houston had never seen anything quite like United States v. Kenneth Sutherland and Associates, and the irony wasn't lost on anyone that Kenneth would face sentencing for systematic property fraud, while the county sheriff whose ranch he'd tried to steal sat in the gallery wearing his dress uniform, representing both the victim and the law enforcement community Kenneth had systematically attacked. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity with Texas Rangers, federal agents, rural landowners, and agricultural advocates who'd driven from across Texas to witness what prosecutors called the most comprehensive property fraud prosecution in federal court history. Kenneth sat at the defendant's table in his orange prison jumpsuit, his pink dress shirt and black dress pants replaced by federal detention clothing, looking like a deflated balloon as he faced consequences for targeting the wrong county sheriff. Chief Judge Maria Rodriguez, herself a descendant of Texas homesteaders who understood the sacred nature of land ownership, would handle Kenneth's sentencing with judicial precision that makes federal sentences educational experiences for property criminals. The smell of furniture polish and Texas justice filled the courtroom as Kenneth's overworked public defender prepared to argue for mercy in a case where mercy would insult every agricultural family Kenneth had victimized. The evidence presentation took 11 days and filled court records with overwhelming documentation of Kenneth's systematic property fraud criminal enterprise. Federal prosecutors presented 2,347 pieces of evidence. Wire recordings of Kenneth confessing to federal crimes while attempting to steal my ranch, photographs of forged federal documents, financial records showing $47 million in stolen agricultural properties, and testimony from 67 ranching families targeted by Kenneth's systematic theft campaigns. The scope of his criminal organization was staggering. Corrupt officials in 7 states, fraudulent legal services, and a sophisticated network designed to eliminate agricultural operations through systematic property theft, while corrupting local government to provide legal cover for criminal activities targeting law enforcement families and ranching communities. My victim impact testimony provided the court with detailed analysis of Kenneth's criminal methods and their broader implications for agricultural preservation and law enforcement family safety. Your Honor, I began, addressing Judge Rodriguez while Kenneth squirmed in his seat. The defendant didn't just attempt to steal my family's ranch through fraudulent tax liens and forged documents. He systematically undermined agricultural communities by targeting ranching families with criminal harassment, designed to eliminate agricultural operations that have sustained rural Texas for generations. His actions represent domestic terrorism, specifically targeting agricultural families and law enforcement personnel. His criminal organization poses ongoing threats to rural community survival and agricultural preservation throughout Texas and the American West. The agricultural properties he attacked have sustained ranching families for over a century, and his systematic theft threatens the foundation of rural communities that feed America. The financial destruction was swift and comprehensive, as federal forfeiture proceedings seized every asset Kenneth had acquired through criminal activity. His Willowbrook Estates development, valued at $340 million, was forfeited to compensate victims and restore agricultural properties to rightful owners. His personal mansion, luxury vehicles, investment accounts, and development company assets were liquidated to fund agricultural restoration and restitution payments to 67 ranching families he'd victimized. Kenneth's entire lifestyle, built on stealing agricultural property and destroying ranching families, was dismantled by federal agents who specialized in recovering assets from organized crime operations. Kenneth's co-conspirators faced federal justice as his criminal organization collapsed under prosecution designed to protect agricultural families. County Tax Assessor Gerald Morrison received 28 years for conspiracy and systematic property fraud, his public position forfeited and pensions seized for agricultural restitution. Environmental activist Sandra Phillips received 24 years for criminal conspiracy to steal protected agricultural properties through systematic fraud and corruption. The corrupt county officials who'd enabled Kenneth's theft faced sentences ranging from 18 to 32 years for systematic violation of agricultural protection laws. Judge Rodriguez's sentencing remarks became legendary in federal court circles for comprehensive protection of agricultural heritage and condemnation of property fraud targeting rural families. Mr. Sutherland, she said, looking directly at Kenneth as he sat trembling in his orange jumpsuit, you have systematically victimized agricultural families through a criminal organization that specialized in property theft disguised as community development. Your elimination of ranching operations represents an attack on agricultural survival that threatens the foundation of food production and rural communities throughout Texas and the American West. This court will not tolerate such egregious criminal conduct that destroys agricultural heritage, that sustains rural families and feeds our nation. The sentence was devastating and final: 37 years in federal prison without possibility of parole, followed by 20 years of supervised probation with restrictions on real estate activities, contact with agricultural families, and residence in rural communities where ranching operations were common. Kenneth would be 95 years old before his release, and federal probation conditions would prevent him from ever again engaging in activities that could threaten agricultural families. The civil judgment was equally comprehensive as federal court awarded $23.7 million in damages for property fraud, systematic harassment of agricultural families, and criminal elimination of ranching operations protected under agricultural laws. The judgment included punitive damages designed to deter similar criminal activities and compensate families for generations of agricultural heritage destroyed by Kenneth's criminal organization. The legislative impact extended beyond individual justice as Congress passed the Agricultural Family Protection Act, strengthening penalties for systematic property fraud targeting ranching families and creating federal oversight of development projects threatening agricultural communities. The Rodriguez Amendment established criminal penalties for harassment of law enforcement families and systematic targeting of agricultural properties. My ranch continues operating as it has for over a century, supporting cattle operations that feed Texas communities while serving as a demonstration of sustainable agriculture and rural heritage preservation. The Rodriguez Ranch became a symbol of successful resistance to property fraud and criminal harassment targeting agricultural families. The annual Agricultural Heritage Day celebration at the ranch draws ranching families from across Texas who have successfully defended their properties against criminal fraud schemes. Children play in the same pastures where my great-grandfather raised cattle in 1887, their laughter echoing across land that reflects agricultural heritage that built Texas and sustained rural communities for generations. Kenneth's story became a cautionary tale taught in law enforcement training programs about protecting agricultural families from property fraud and investigating systematic criminal enterprises targeting rural communities. His systematic harassment of one county sheriff triggered the largest property fraud investigation in federal court history, destroyed a criminal organization operating across 7 states, and resulted in federal legislation protecting agricultural families from property theft. The ranch still supports cattle on pastures that have sustained 4 generations of Rodriguez families. The springs still provide water that has flowed since my great-grandfather claimed this land in 1887. And agricultural operations still contribute to Texas food production while preserving rural heritage that defines our state's character. But now it also serves as a reminder that agricultural families are worth fighting for, that property fraud can be defeated through federal law enforcement, and that justice sometimes comes with the satisfying irony of watching property thieves discover